Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Maoist-Third Worldist Collective. Today, I wanted to talk about the subject of Third World and Fourth World religions. Let me begin with a definition of the Third World and then of the Fourth World. The Third World refers to the developing world, countries which are in the process of development. They are generally poor countries. They are generally countries without, for example, the wealth of the United States, Europe, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and so forth. Where I live in Geraldo County of Texas is literally 2 miles north of Mexico on Bryan Road. I simply leave my condo complex, make a left-hand turn on Bryan Road, and in 2 miles, I cross over the bridge and I'm in Mexico. Now, I don't usually go to Mexico that way because there's nothing there. It's basically just woods. But I could if I wanted to, and it is an interesting place. I've seen it from a distance. So that's the Third World. Now, what is the Fourth World? As I define the Fourth World, it is similar to the concept of the subaltern, a term which was used by Antonio Gramsci. The Fourth World can refer to a few different things. For example, it can be used to refer to indigenous populations, such as Native Americans, the First Nations people of Canada, the Inuit people of Alaska, the native Hawaiians, the Maori people of New Zealand, and the Aboriginal people of Australia, as well as many others. If you trace all of our ancestries back, all of us were at one time indigenous, but most of us have been separated from our land. And what kind of binds the Fourth World together, especially indigenous people together, is the land. That is a major theme throughout many, perhaps most, indigenous cultures, is the land. They define themselves commonly in relationship to the land, and therefore many indigenous religions are also centered upon the land and upon the way in which they relate to the land. Even in English, we have a concept that is kind of related to that, although most people who speak English, at least in the West, don't take it seriously, and that is Mother Nature. Mother Nature is based on the idea that the earth literally is our mother, that the earth gave birth to us. Well, we may see that as kind of a metaphor or even as kind of a joke sometimes. But in much of the world, that's not the way they look at Mother Nature. Mother Nature is seen as literally a goddess, and she is the fertility goddess, one of the goddesses of creation. She is an actual being who rules over the earth. In the religion of Wicca, which was started by various people, but primarily Gerald Gardner back in the 1940s, his religion includes two gods. One is the horned male god, and the other is the female goddess who is sometimes regarded as Diana. People who belong to covens generally worship both of those gods, and they do so on a kind of rotating basis. So, for example, for half the year, they may worship the horn god. For the other half of the year, they may worship the female goddess or Diana. Now let's get down to talking about some genuine contemporary forms of religious expression in the Third World and the Fourth World. In the Third World, there are many indigenous religions. For example, what we commonly refer to as voodoo. And there are many parallels to voodoo throughout the world. Voodoo itself is a religious tradition practiced in parts of the Caribbean, which originated in Africa. When it was transplanted to the Caribbean, for example, Jamaica, many of the gods and goddesses became renamed as saints. And so, in effect, practitioners of voodoo, when they worship the saints, are actually worshiping gods and goddesses. That is voodoo. There are others as well. If, for instance, you look at the United States, one religion which has always held tremendous fascination to me is the religion of the Lakota Sioux people. The Lakota Sioux have a very important personage that they worship, who is called the White Buffalo Calf Woman. According to legend, a white buffalo calf came up to the Lakota Sioux and was transformed into a beautiful white goddess. She taught the Lakota Sioux agriculture and other skills over a period of many years. Then, at the end of her stay among the Lakota Sioux, she transformed herself back into a white buffalo calf and escaped into the wilderness. Till this day, there is tremendous respect for women among the Lakota Sioux in particular because of their admiration for the white buffalo calf woman. Among the Lakota Sioux, and by extension among many other Native American tribes and nations, there is a notion of two-spirited people. The old name for that are the Bradash, but the term Bradash is often regarded as vulgar by some people, not by all. And so most scholars avoid using the term Bradash and instead use the term two-spirit, which has no vulgar connotations whatsoever. Okay, so if you have a two-spirited woman, that woman might be a mother, but in addition to being a mother, might also be a hunter. If you have a two-spirited man, that man might be a hunter, but in addition to being a hunter, might also be a mother. So there is a kind of mingling of identities. We really don't have anything close to that exactly in white American culture. Perhaps the closest we come is the concept of genderqueer. Somebody who is genderqueer is somebody who is kind of ambivalent about their gender. They really don't care whether they are female or male or feminine or masculine. And they may dress in an intentionally confusing way so they don't look either one or the other. And they may engage in practices, some of which might be regarded as feminine, and others of which might be regarded as masculine. But generally, the notion of being genderqueer has no specific spiritual connotations. That is why it is not exactly the same as the Lakota Sioux concept of being two-spirited. I have had conversations with Native Americans over the concept of being two-spirited. And today, that concept has spread beyond the Lakota Sioux into other Native American nations and tribes. And today, it is most commonly used as a designation for people who are lesbian or gay, which historically does not seem entirely accurate, but obviously that is not for me to say. People who are Lakota Sioux, people who are Native American are the ones who get to make that decision. Okay, so what is the point of my mentioning this, and how would this tie into the more general theme of Maoism Third Worldism? I think that when we are practicing communism, especially from a Maoist Third Worldist perspective, we need to be sensitive to the religious traditions of the people that we are approaching. In the West, there is a tendency to separate religion from the rest of life. So religion is compartmentalized. For example, people go to church on Sunday. People go to shul, temple, synagogue on Saturday. And then the rest of the week, they do other things, unless they are very religious, in which case they may go to temple on a daily basis, or they may perform Jewish rituals on a daily basis as well. But most people don't. Most people look at those things as separate activities. In other words, as sociologist Emil Durkheim said, there is a clear division between the sacred and the profane. Now, when Durkheim referred to the profane, he was using it in a technical sense. He was not talking about profanity in the sense of vulgar slang or four-letter words. He meant ordinary things. So when I get up and brush my teeth and take a shower and have breakfast, that would be profane for most people. For most people. When I pray, when I go to a house of worship, that would be sacred. We make a very distinct distinction. That's redundant. We make a very definite distinction between those two areas of life. In many fourth world indigenous societies, which include some societies in the third world, as well as some societies in the first world, no such distinctions are made. Life itself is spiritual. Life itself is religious. So, if I want to introduce communism, or if I'm going to practice conscientization, critical consciousness, or consciousness raising to an indigenous person, I need to be aware of what that person's religious practices are. Because if I'm not, most likely I am not going to be effectively communicating to that person. If I think of religion in the more common standard first world sense, where religion is separated from the ordinary things that we do in our lives, then I will simply lose the person. The person may have no interest in talking with me, and that would be understandable. So it is really important that when we study the third world, when we study the fourth world, particularly with an eye towards spreading communism through conscientization, that we be aware of the religious and spiritual practices which may, in many instances, dominate their lives. Although that may not be the way that you and I, perhaps, lead our lives, we need to focus on how the other, how the subaltern, how the fourth world, how people in the third world, in some cases, lead their lives, because that is ultimately all that matters. So religious sensitivity is very important, and that is basically what I wanted to address in this podcast. For now, this is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Maoist Third Worldist Collective. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.